Vulcan now. We're going to Skype Julie Vulcan from Sydney now. Let's all cross our fingers, it will be working. I would like to introduce Julie Vulcan to everyone, who is a multidisciplinary artist in Sydney, and she works with performance, installation, text, durational and site-specific formats. And Julie is showing her work really everywhere in the world. Has been at Spill Festival and Venice International Performance Art Week, Fowler Melbourne, Rapid Pulse, Chicago, to name a few. And yeah, apart from being an artist, Julie is also a director, mentor and facilitator. And I met her in 2014 at Proximity Festival in Perth in Australia, where Julie was an artist provocateur and facilitated a number of workshops. And as part of these workshops, she did one on artist self-care, and that's why we are today going to Skype in Julie, because that's a workshop that since then always really stuck with me and felt a really useful approach. And actually I recommended Julie also to our former residence member Ria Hartley. When she worked on her performance recall for Spill Festival, she worked with Julie on on self-care strategies and developed a manual for her performance. So Julie, it's really great to have you here today.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. So my first question to you is why you originally started to look into developing strategies for self-care for artists.
Yeah, I think there's always a number of situations in a way that you sort of look back on, and actually they're sort of a beautiful gift in hindsight, and you realize how differently things could have been. And so I don't think, not necessarily with any sort of great sense of loss or failure, but just purely as lessons learned as a gift, you know, I suppose. So I think for me this idea of a need for self-care strategies had started softly percolating for me to the surface via a number of events or elements and concerns in my life, and then in a way, it sort of violently surfaced to prompt me into articulating it into some formal structure. And I think that one of the elements in my life that definitely contributed to this was my training as a body worker. So I work in a style of Hawaiian massage or lomi massage, and I worked for 7 years in a clinic in Sydney specifically to this. And over that time, and through that sort of act of working on people's physical and energetic bodies, and also witnessing their journeys, I learned so much about myself, and also about our general habits as humans and our attention to our deeper sort of self-care. So I think that was sort of that's one little aspect that sits there. And then I suppose the event that I think really subsequently helped me consolidate this idea of a self-care strategy was actually around the performance work, and actually around I Stand In, which is the work that came to Spill in 2013. And some people may know this work or not, but it basically is a performance in which I enact a stylized corpse washing routine over and over again on different participant bodies that are basically standing in for an anonymous body count. And the tagline for I Stand In was a ritual for the forgotten, misplaced, unrecovered and removed. So that gives you some sort of idea of what I was working with. And also it was over a 9-hour period in which I did not, I had no break in. And so without going into too much detail about the actual work, you can understand that it was quite a highly charged space by the end of the day and into the evening. So I was really when I first presented this work, I was really thinking about everything, to keep it running smooth. I was really thinking about my scheduling. I was thinking about my assistants behind the scenes, and I was, thinking about the care for my participants. And I also, I was thinking about the food that they might need and practical things for everyone else. And I also had food for myself afterwards. But what I didn't really count on was actually the fallout at the end of the day and the next day for myself emotionally. And so when I found myself the next day in bed sobbing and sort of realizing I actually needed to talk to someone, and understanding what was going on, but also just realizing I needed to actually talk to someone and put this, be able to sort of talk it through. But I also knew I couldn't just ring up anyone. I didn't have the energy to sort of explain the whole context of what had just happened and why I might be feeling like I was, and that actually I was okay, but I just was, So I started going through a mental list of people that I could call, and I was finding it really hard to land on someone that would be appropriate or that would even be available. So, and then just at that moment, a friend rang who was actually an ex-colleague of mine and a massage colleague of mine. And it was sort of like this magical moment where of all the people to ring me, she was exactly the right person to call. And I think that, so in a way, it was sort of this really weird thing of that performance work and that serendipity of that moment of my friend ringing me, that sort of jump-started me to really look a little bit more deeper at this sort of idea of self-care and building these structures around work, when you're making work. So not just about like the actual work and when you're in it and the duty of care to your audience, but all of those things that build up around it in terms of the lead-in, during and after.
Okay, so what would you say are the strategies you would suggest for an artist who is planning a performance for the before, during and after?
Well, I think it's always very particular to each person and also the situation, obviously. But I think those 3 points are the main things you've always got to look at: pre-performance, during, and post-performance. They're like your guidelines. And then I think within those 3 sections there are subcategories. So like there's sort of pre-performance and there's like post-performance as well. So, I mean, one of the major things that I first get people to do, and it is about planning months out. It's not about doing it, the day before. It's just like I suggest them to make lists. We make lots of lists. Sylvia will remember we make lots of lists. So it's like, just make a list of everything that you can think of that that might need to be addressed or that might come into play, and just keep adding to it. And it doesn't matter how small or how big those things are. It might just be something like, oh my God, I've actually got a piece of equipment that has batteries. Do I need to check those batteries every day before my performance if you're doing performance over a number of days? What am I going to eat? Is the space hot or cold? Will I be hot or cold afterwards? Do I want to be checking emails during a performance season? Do I need to put auto reply on? Am I at risk of a physical injury? And eventually you build all these things and they will all land into one of those 3 categories. And I think that the main thing I keep coming back to is that in the end, we are actually all responsible for making sure our needs are met, because we're actually the only ones that really understand what they are. So I suppose a little bit more in detail, if you were to look at some of those pre-performance, performance and post-performance things, would be like, one thing I think is really important, and I actually see this as self-care, is your planning and production and your conversation and your communication with, either the production team or the producer or the event organizer or the curator, whoever you're dealing with. It's so important to just double check that things that you need to be in place are in place, or that the space you've asked is the space you're getting, or that, you know, whatever those things are, just never assume anything. It's really important that, you know, you're happy with what's being set out, and that the producers actually understand what it is that you're requiring. And, you know, it's so much better to sort of express any issues sooner rather than later, because and be able to explain what the issues are and what the ramifications of those are, because then they can be troubleshooted, you know, like then people understand what it is that you're dealing with and why you need things to be resolved a certain way. You know, because if you leave these things to the last minute, then that causes undue stress, causes reactive moments, and that's all not very good for your own self-care. So, you know, I think that there are some things that we need, you know, so this is sort of the holistic thing I'm talking about. I'm just not talking about, like, you know, eating well on the day of your performance. I'm just actually talking about how you care for yourself in the whole lead up and during and after. And these are all part of that. And so some of the things maybe also to look at in terms of prepping your performance is, like, what are your food intakes? You know, like, are you doing long durational performances? Are you doing something really, really physical over a number of nights? Like, what sort of food do you need to make sure is going to sustain you over that time? I mean, you know your body best, you know how much food you need to eat, or if you're someone that suffers from low blood sugar regularly, or all of those things. So what do you do to put in place to make sure that you're operating in, you know, the most sort of efficient way and not getting stressed or not getting tired? And even, like, really simple things like, you know, do you get, you know, if you get nervous, if you suffer from nerves and maybe you have, like, text you have to read out and maybe you're scared you're going to forget the text. I mean, we all have that if we need to. But what, you know, is there simple little prompts or visual prompts you could put in place that help you remember a certain text at a certain time if that happened, if you drew a blank? It's just stuff like that, you know. And I think, so that's sort of all just thinking about things around pre.
Yeah.
And then I think during, you know, even just like really basic things like if you're doing a durational performance and you really need to go to the toilet, like, where is the toilet? Or, like, if you're having an emergency, where is the toilet? Did you even check where the toilet was in your space? You know, or in relationship to your space? And had you thought about how you might leave that space and come back into that space within the context of your performance? I mean, they're actually, like, very simple things to put into place, but if you're suddenly trying to think about that in the middle of a performance, it changes the way you are, and it might, you know, change the rest of your performance. And similarly, water, like, what if you really need water in the middle of your performance and you've neglected to put some somewhere, or even if there's something about an audience member and they're not doing something that they were instructed to do, or they're having a certain reaction, how do you work with your audiences? You know, what are those, you know, how do you troubleshoot around all those possible scenarios, and do you have rules around that? So yeah, things like that. And then after the big one, after, really, you know, even just simple things about what are the things you need straight away after a performance. Are you someone that, you know, do you need to go straight to the toilet? Do you need to have a wash or a shower? Do you need to get warm, or you need to get cold, depending on what you've been doing? Do you need to have someone there to give you a hug straight away, or do you need someone to talk to, or you don't want to talk to anyone at all? And another thing, like, even in relation to cleaning up performances, it's like if you've just done a really, really intense or emotionally charged performance, and it's part of a night or an event where actually whatever mess you've created, or even if there's just a few things there, they need to be moved out of the space straight away. Are you able to do that? Maybe you're not able to do that. So thinking about how you might be after that performance and actually saying, well, actually, no, I need to put someone else in place to clean up for me. You know, things like that. and then even looking like post performance. I mean, if you've done a big scene and season over maybe 4 or 5 nights or even 2 weeks, and it's been really intense, you know, don't wait till you've finished the season to think, oh, maybe I should book in a massage tomorrow or the next day or the next day. Book that massage in before you've even done your season. Book that holiday in before you've even done that season. Book whatever you need to do that would support you after something before. Don't pretend that you will necessarily do it after. So I think it's sort of like, I think what I'm trying to do is like help us like create this actual little manual that has everything set in place for us, so that in the heat of the moment of actually production week and performance week, when so many things just fall out of, you know, they just fall to the wayside, we've actually got our check-in points, or we've already put them in place.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can totally relate, for instance, especially after premieres, the feeling like a zombie really, and not being able just to interact with people in the normal way. So it's really interesting. I thought it was really interesting to think about what can I put in place after a premiere that I feel good, and yeah, carry on. When we developed that self-care manual for our shows, we were actually also looking in a broader way in terms of structures for living as an artist. So it wasn't only about putting in strategies for self-care for an actual performance, but what do we need as artists to take care of ourselves and deal with all kinds of obstacles to overcome. And yeah, so I wanted to ask you why you think that artists especially need to take care of themselves.
Yeah. Look, I think it really just comes down to, if we don't look after ourselves, who is going to in the way that we need, you know? I think that it comes back to taking that responsibility on and having respect and generosity and integrity to ourselves. And then I think that this has a roll-on effect also in how we are in our own community in general, and how our communities operate, and then how that reflects back to us. I think, you know, if we can sort of, you know, operate in a way where we actually do come from a place of generosity for ourselves, then I think it mirrors back. And also I think we owe it to ourselves to understand as completely as possible what it is that we need, before we can assume that others will understand that. So, you know, once we know, then we're able to request these things and put them in place and build those structures that support us. You know, it's the same as in life. We can't expect our partners or our family and friends to sort of really understand what our needs are if we don't express them within the context of particular situations. So, you know, producers or venue organisers are the same. They're not psychic, you know. And I mean, really, maybe our friends possibly know our habits, or our partners know our habits better than we do. But I mean, you know, definitely when you then take it that bit further out, I mean, you know, as I said, you know, your curators and people like that are not necessarily going to know what you really, really need unless you let them know. And so I think the other thing to acknowledge, which is really important, is that as artists, we're not working the same way as most other people are. We're not working with strict working weeks or parameters. We all know that. And but actually sometimes it's really good to just actually stop and recognize that for what it actually means and how that can affect us. You know, we just need to acknowledge our choices as artists, and within this, we must be brave, and to remain in those choices that we've made, especially because we're often addressing or trying to make sense of, you know, really crucial issues, you know, that exist in our time. And there's a quote that I have that I just read recently, actually, from Rebecca Solnit, and from her book Hope in the Dark, and she says, "This is an extraordinary time full of vital, transformative movements that could not be foreseen. it's also a nightmarish time. Full engagement requires the ability to perceive both. And I think that, you know, in relation to this quote's sort of really interesting for me as an artist, because it reminds me that, you know, about self-care in the everyday. It reminds me that living every day as an artist means that we are often living in full engagement, and that awareness that is happening around us, you know, what's happening around us can sometimes weigh really heavily. And so how do we look after ourselves in relation to this, you know, and remind ourselves that there are always 2 points to that pendulum swinging, and so how do we survive through those sort of cycles?
And could you talk a bit about your actual approach? I think if I understand it right, it has to do with our personal attitudes and about basically re-evaluating and adapting our behavior in order to deal with the everyday as artists, really.
Yeah. I think it's really just, it comes down to, I work a lot with trying to become more conscious of our habits. And, you know, I think as artists we're, you know, on top of our own personal and emotional investment in our work, we also have to deal with what it means to be an artist in the world and in this sort of very competitive arts marketplace. And, you know, we often compromise our personal lives or put things on hold, and, you know, there's financial strain, and we have to manage failure and success, and, you know, all of these things can actually be, you know, psychologically and physically damaging if we don't understand how we can manage them in a balanced way. And I think that part of that is that we need to look at what our strategies are, and I think we all have strategies, whether we acknowledge them or not as strategies or not, you know. But I think we've built them over a long period of time, and they've sort of accumulated, and they may not be the best strategies, but we don't sort of like really unpick them because we're too busy or we're too distracted. So what I'm actually looking at is like, well, let's look at what strategies we've already put in place, which are sort of like habits, and let's sort of try and rebalance them in a more holistic way, and let's sort of put some other strategies in there that are actually really good for us as well, and that really serve us, and maybe get rid of some of those outmoded habits that are not really serving us. You know, it's a bit like, you know, I suppose that sort of dust in the corner of the flat, or the mold in the bathroom, or maybe that mania for cleaning. It's just sort of like we don't question them, but they're actually like survival habits sometimes. And so I think in my self-care manual, I get people to make a lot of lists, and these ones are about listing habits that we do in terms of responses to situations or various things that might happen in our lives, and then, like, you know, basically breaking them down to what are quick fixes and what are like more long-term, more sustainable habits. And you know, like, some of those quick fixes are maybe things like just, you know, going out and binge drinking for a night or something like that, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like, but is that something that you do regularly in response to something? And like, Carrie, that looks like a way of dealing with it. I mean, you know, it's like, or do you just sort of like, you know, oh, this thing's happened now, all right, I'm just gonna like lock myself up in my room and watch, you know, 24 hours of The Wire or something, you know. It's just sort of like, that's okay, but if that's really what you want to do, but if that's what you're doing all the time in response to something, then maybe it's not a healthy choice. So what are other things that you could do? And so I suppose what I think about is that I think when I get people to list the things that they feel like they do that are good for them, I also get them to list things that they would like to have in there, but maybe don't understand how they could actually make them happen. So, you know, they might be things that they go, well, you know, I'd really love to, when this happens, I would really love to be going off and spending, you know, 4 days in a spa doing this. Well, okay, don't not put that in there because you either A, can't see how it would happen, or you don't have any money for it, or whatever. let's workshop around that. Like, if that's what you really need to do and that's what's going to support you, what are the things that you could possibly do to change, to sort of maybe laterally make something like that happen. Yeah, so I suppose I just sort of try and make us think of a little bit more outside the square and not just like the usual things that we do, or just, again, like things like maybe you wouldn't do something because you would be too scared to ask someone to put that into place, or you're too self-conscious about something. So how do you shift that, you know? Because maybe they're really great things. So, I mean, I know I'm not being very specific here because it sort of needs lists, but yeah. So I think it's just about like shifting our ideas around what is possible.
Do you think it has helped you working with these approaches in general?
Yeah, I definitely do, because you know, I think over time you know, for all those reasons that we've just talked about, I think that you know, we invest so much as artists, and I know for myself it's like eventually it does take its toll, and you want to be feeling the best you can, and I want to be coming out of doing performance work feeling like really exhilarated by that and healthy, and not paying for that for the next, you know, week or 2 weeks or something. So you know, it actually doesn't take much, and it's not about being like really stoic or being like, you know, making sure you do yoga and only eat like gluten-free food or something like that. It's not about like creating situations that you can't actually fulfill. Like that's if you set yourself up for failure, that's just as bad. It's about actually just sort of shifting things slightly to make sure that you're serving yourself as best you can, but also in a realistic way. So, I mean, you know, like for instance, I was saying to you, Sylvia, that I'm preparing for a performance in July, and I'll be doing this performance for 24 hours straight. And so part of that will be, for me, you know, in the lead-in, I'm already talking to the producers about what happens at the end of that 24 hours and how we work with that. And there's artist talks that are meant to happen about when do they happen, how long, like, you know, what is best serving me at the end of those 24 hours. And but even beforehand, it's like, you know, I will change the way I eat and the way I hydrate myself over the, you know, a few days before in the lead into that, just so that my body gets used to not having as much food regularly and making sure I'm fully hydrated before I go into that and things like that. So just planning for all of that and knowing that I can, and, you know, be working with my body the best way I can so that I don't come out of that 24 hours just a wreck. Yeah.
You mentioned that you're developing a small publication on artist self-care. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to tell, but I just, I think that the really great thing about working with Ria last year on the self-care manual was that, you know, up until that point, I really loved working face-to-face with people and or working in groups. It's something I really enjoy. And but when I did the self-care manual with Ria, because we worked over sort of 4 months before the actual event, so we were building up towards it, I realised that actually through Skype and email that was a really valid way of doing it, and it still worked. So then it got me really thinking about the manual and how I could create it more as a small publication with all of the workbook tasks in there, but also designing it as a bit of a sort of logbook as well, so it becomes your own personal manual as well as having all the exercises and things in there. So, and that it's an evolving manual. So I'm sort of just working on how the design of all of that would be and what it would look like. But hopefully in a year's time there might be a print publication and a downloadable e-publication.
Sounds great. I definitely want to have one of those.
I'll give you a signed copy.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, I think we have, let me just check the time. I think we have maybe 5 minutes of time for people in the audience if you have got any questions to Julie about artist self-care. So this is your possibility now to ask her any questions. Okay, there's one over there.
How much it changes? Thinking about, I'm really excited by the manual, and how much individual. I can't quite get the words out. Individual need can be built into a general manual. Like the thing about working one-to-one with Ria is kind of developing specifically what she needs. And I find that a lot of the problem of what happens in the theatre industry is the attempt to create a one-size-fits-all. Whereas what you're really talking about is not that. Yeah, how you're thinking about building that into the manual, I'm really interested in that.
Did you hear that, or do I? Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yes, and you're spot on because whoever you are.
Maddie, hi.
Yeah, I think that this is a really important thing, and what I suppose I was trying to get through, or in today, is that yes, I don't think there is a one size fit all at all. You know, I think it's very, very specific to everyone's situation and what they're doing. So as opposed to the manual, what I'm hoping to do is like create scenarios where the prompts will allow people to build their very individual manual around that. So, of course, you know, it's never going to be the same as me working, you know, having those conversations one-to-one and talking, but just trying to sort of find as many sort of scenarios and questions and provocations that will help you think of everything that you can do to build your own individual manual.
Any other questions? Yeah?
I was just wondering about money. It's really lovely to hear you talk and think of all these ways, the kind of really obvious ways in which we have to look after ourselves, but how we often forget to do that. But also about how you might need to approach each production or performance with an organisation. But it just made me wonder about how you afford to take those extra cares that you need sometimes, and how does that involve, how do you make those demands on venues and organisations, and does that create problems, or do you have strategies specifically towards managing that, I guess?
Well, again, I think it's all depends on what your work is and what you're doing, but nearly all of the things that I would say, for instance, in my work, I very few of those things would require a lot of extra money outside of you know, whatever the production or the organisers have already set in place. I mean, you know, like a lot of that stuff. I mean, the big important issues for me was like, do I have somebody to go to at the end of a performance? This is about caring within your community, finding your people within your community. So, you know, I don't, you know, like if I have a good friend that is going to sort of help me be there and talk through with me, that isn't a monetary situation, that's a relationship, that's an exchange. Having your food that you need, I mean, we're not talking about necessarily high-end catering here, we're just talking about, like, you know, the basic things that you need. And of course you need to work within your means, absolutely. But I think that I mean, I can't answer that completely because I'm not sure of like the situation of everyone's situation, but definitely within the areas that I work with, I can usually find a I can usually find all those things I need to support myself without extra like big financial outlay or anything like that. It's more to do with your attitudes. It's more to do with your attitudes and things like sleep and stuff like that. Money, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it depends whether you're doing if you're doing a big season of work, then I would assume you're getting paid for doing that season of work. If you're doing like a one-off independent show somewhere for a night, then maybe you're not getting paid, but then maybe there's other things that, you know, you can, trade-offs within that event. I mean, it's all up. I think it's, you know, again, I think it's about us being creative as well. You know, we're very good at that. So we're very good at improvising and being creative, but often we're improvising and being creative about our product and not necessarily being creative about caring for ourselves. I think this is the thing. It just keeps coming back to like, what are the things we put back for ourselves, you know?
Okay, we've got
Does that answer the question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, thanks. I guess I was thinking, yeah, I guess my question was wrong. What I meant more about was how you approach venues. Things like you were saying, like, oh, it's good to. I'm just imagining like shows I've made where maybe I need a space straight afterwards where I can sit in it quiet in the dark if I've done a durational piece and lie down. But actually, the process of trying to get to arrange that isn't ever straightforward, and so the extra time I need to put in to make sure that can happen requires extra administrative time, and I guess that eventually becomes money. That's less like cash, but more like the time, the extra time you need to spend on those things, particularly with organising an event.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I suppose that sort of fits back into where I was talking earlier about that sort of pre-production of like having those conversations really early on, and yeah, I mean, I don't know how to answer the question about financial reimbursement for that, because I think, you know, that's unfortunately something that happens, isn't it, for artists? And I'm not saying it's good, but we do spend a lot of time in that space of admin. And I suppose what I'm mitigating against is that if we can be on top of some of those requirements early on and be able to explain clearly to producers why we require certain spaces or certain needs, then possibly we may get what we need a little bit easier than trying to push through it at too late in the piece, which might end up sort of causing a lot more stress and maybe a lot more time. So it's a moving beast, and it's always about testing things out, but I think it's just trying to sort of second guess everything as much as you can and push those things through.
We've got one last question. We are a bit tight with time now, but let's just tackle this last question, and then Julie will also have a provocation for all of us. But first, this last question. I'll try and move you around. I'm not sure if it's working.
So I was interested in what you said just then about the moving beast, and I guess the relationship or the line between self-care and comfort. And there's an artist from Mexico who I really love called Rocio Bolivar, and she talks a lot about She talks a lot about the pain that she experiences in her performances, and how that pain is a sacrifice that she is giving for the audience, and that her self-care processes afterwards are like mercilessly, pitilessly austere, actually, in the way that she cares for herself, because she knows that if she makes it too comfortable, then the next time she goes into that space when she's on stage, it won't take it as far as she won't take it as far as she wants it to go. And whilst I definitely think that like knowing when to eating food and things like that are like absolutely essential. Have there ever been any experiences where you, like, as you say, it's a moving beast, where you thought, actually, I've become too comfortable now, this is a bit too easy? Or maybe not. I guess I'm interested in that line.
Yeah, okay. So that's another, yeah, definitely. And again, I suppose that's why I keep saying that these are, this manual, and looking at this manual is like, I can't, getting back to almost to the first question, I can't actually define everyone's self-care manual, because exactly everyone's goalposts are going to be different, and parameters are going to be different, and the reasons and the intentions and what they're doing are going to be different. So absolutely, in that case, you're spot on. I mean, the way she's working is she knows. I mean, you're also talking about someone that has like been working has such a strong practice over decades.
Yeah.
And so obviously. You're understanding and getting to know your practice and your body very well, and what you need and what you don't need, and what you need to sort of continue and make that viable. So I think that this is it. That's why I'm saying that, like, I think that it is a movable feast, or your strategies at one point in time may serve you then, but like maybe 10 years on they're not the same strategies. So but I think it's about like making it still viable for you to keep going. I think it's this thing that if you are in this for the long haul and your art is your life, then how do we sort of maintain these strategies to allow us to keep going and not to just sort of give up or burn out unnecessarily. So so I think that that's why I'm interested in the publication, of actually sort of having this space within the publication where you can actually see your own self-care changing, in relation to how you change as well. So I can't really answer that specifically, but I know what you're saying, and I think that what I'm trying to encourage is that people be aware of what they need right now, and what it means, how you support yourself around that, and then how that keeps moving in the future.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I think that was our last question. We don't have to move on, but it would be really great to hear the provocation that we've thought about for our audiences here today.
Yeah, okay. And I think this is something that everyone can just take away with them and think about. But I've thought there's many provocations I could send your way, but really, I think I just want to bring it back down to, how we can be in service to each other and our support networks. So my provocation is really twofold. It's like, list 3 people that are your personal go-to people. And at some point in the next 5 days, let them know and why they are your go-to person. So just think of like 3 people that, maybe in a performance situation, but maybe just generally are people that you would go to for certain things. And then make a list of 3 people that you feel that you would like to be in service to, and let them know why you would like them to offer them that service. So in sense of like them being a performer, an artist and something, if they were ever in a situation where they needed someone to be their support person, and you think that you could be that person, let them know. Because I think that sometimes we see people and we don't actually, the person that could help us or is often right in front of us, or we're too scared to ask, or we don't think that they would think of us. So it's twofold. Find a 3 personal go-to people for yourself and let them know, and then go and approach 3 people and say that you're interested to be their go-to person if they ever needed one.
That's really beautiful. Thanks so much, Julie. And I think we should give her a big applause. We're going to move on, and you have a nice evening.
Well, thank you, everyone.
I think we've got a 5-minute break now.